Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is BurnCrowSP, and here's a topic that has been suggested to me multiple times in the past. So by now, you should be aware that MegaMan is easily my favorite video game series. And since we are in that part of the year known as MegaMay, I saw no harm in putting out a list where I try to rank all of the entries in what's known as the Classic series. And so, before I dive headfirst into the lowest spot on the list, allow me to be transparent and let you know about the rules I followed when scripting and deciding over every single spot on the ranking. First off, I will be including all 12 games of the Classic series, these being Mega Man 1 through 11 and Mega Man and Base. This means that the Game Boy titles, as well as the Wily Wars, will not be included, since the first are quite different and they would fit on a list of their own, and the latter being a remake of the original NES trilogy for the Sega Mega Drive. I will not be counting spin-offs either, like Power Battle or Battle and Chase, since they cannot be compared to each other. And second, this list is based on my own opinion. However, I tried my best to put aside my previous feelings for most of these titles, in an attempt to be as fair as possible to each individual entry of the franchise. I felt like this way I can express myself better and maybe bring something more interesting to the table than just my silly opinionated takes on the Blue Bomber's origins. Alright, that said, I hope you all are ready, because I'm diving in right away. Let's go, fellas! Well, one game was bound to be at the bottom of the list, and in my case, that's gonna be Mega Man 6, unfortunately. Being one of the very last games released on the NES, Mega Man 6 arrived very late to stores. In fact, Capcom chose not to publish it overseas, but Nintendo insisted on doing so, and they took the task upon themselves. Interestingly, Europe didn't see a release until 2013, when Mega Man 6 was uploaded to the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console. This entry saw Mega Man attempting to stop the evil Mr. X, who is very clearly a disguised Dr. Wily, from conquering the world by stealing the participants of an international fighting robot contest. With this setting, Mega Man 6 has a very unique set of stages, each one of them being based on a different country from all over the world, like Japan, England, or Brazil. Graphics are very impressive for an NES game, with the usual stunning backgrounds and very complex tilesets for each stage. This is also the first game of the series to incorporate split paths, which will become the main method for unlocking Beat and the newest power-up, the Energy Balancer. When it comes to new gameplay features, this last entry on Nintendo's 8-bit console brought the Rush adapters into the picture. After defeating certain bosses, Mega Man will gain access to these tools, allowing him to fuse with Rush in two different ways. On one hand, the Jet adapter works just like a jetpack would, and on the other hand, the Power adapter gives the Blue Robot the power to punch through any obstacle without any issues. To balance out these two forms, the ability to slide is removed from the main character's toolset while being fused with Rush. And that leads me to, the slide. Mega Man 6's biggest problem is something that was, ironically, not an issue in any game of the series beforehand: the controls. After the slide was introduced in Mega Man 3, this move has always worked the same way. You press down and A to slide, and you can cancel this move by jumping or pressing back on the D-pad. Being able to jump away allowed players to start chaining those slides, and for those who had mastered each level, it became a way to significantly speed up the pace of the gameplay. But then Mega Man 6 changed this for the worse. It is no longer possible to jump out of a slide, nor to chain them, since there is a small delay after each time the move is performed. Granted, you can still cancel the move by pressing back on the D-pad, but that feels clunky, just like the maneuver itself. Oh, and aside from that, for one reason or another, the physics engine used for past games didn't carry over to this last entry on the NES. Thus, the blue bomber feels very heavy. The player is required to hold the A button after each jump, or else Mega Man plummets to the ground like a rock. Needless to say, this makes platforming or even basic movements feel like a pretty cumbersome ordeal. On the positive side though, weapons are pretty fun to use overall, and the bosses who drop them are quite good too. Compared to its predecessor, the difficulty feels more balanced, and the challenge is higher without feeling too unforgiving. While Mega Man 5 had a pretty easy endgame with underwhelming bosses, and we'll get to that in a moment, Mega Man 6 has a different problem, and that is the consistency of these. Some are too simple, others are a bit messy when it comes to patterns and hitboxes, and some are just very silly for some reason. To sum things up, Mega Man 6 is a nutcase of a game that's alright, but that suffers from very uncharacteristic control issues, and that, conjoined with a pretty mellow endgame, sets it in last place on this list. Released in 1992, during the dawn of the NES, the fifth game with Classic MegaMan on the spotlight had a pretty interesting twist plot-wise. Proto Man has assembled 8 new Robot Masters and captured Dr. Light, leaving the protagonist with the task of saving his creator before it's too late. Mega Man 5 might be one of the best looking games on the system, with very impressive backgrounds, a ton of animated tiles, and the usual clean spread work that accompanies the series thus far. The structure of the adventure is the same as its predecessors. After defeating the 8 Robot Masters, there are 4 Proto Man levels, and then 4 Wily stages. As for our main character, he retains the same abilities as he had in Mega Man 4. However, there is one big change that makes this game fall like a stack of dominoes, and that is the charge shot. Compared to previous iterations, this version of the Mega Buster releases a massive shot that can go through enemies if their HP is low enough to be destroyed in a single hit. Considering how by design most opponents have 1 or 2 hit points, this charge shot will decimate them instantly, and that is where the main mechanics of the franchise start to slowly break apart. By having such a strong weapon by default, those new tools that bosses drop after being defeated can be rendered almost useless. And so the usual loop of trying new stages and weapons until the perfect route is found loses some of its impact, hurting replayability in the process. The fact that those weapons wouldn't be that good even if the Buster wasn't strong doesn't help either. There are some good tools like Gyro Attack or Crystal Eye, but then the rest fail to leave a lasting impression. Some are too gimmicky, others are very restrictive when it comes to ammo, or just too weak to give you enough reasons to stop using the Mega Buster. As for those utility tools, Rush Coil has seen a very bizarre update, and this time there is also a new face in town, being Beat the Bird, who is unlocked after collecting all of the 8 leather pieces hidden across the stages. He is a more offensive ally, attacking enemies whenever Mega Man is standing still on the ground. This makes him a very fun companion to use, though you won't unlock him until the 8 Robot Masters are defeated, and by then you might not have enough time to play around with him. Also new and exclusive to this game is the Super Arrow, which is obtained from Starman and it's easily the best tool for speedrunners. When it comes to bosses, Robot Masters have very well designed patterns that can be easy to analyze if you look carefully at how they react to Mega Man's position. However, these patterns are much simpler than what's found in other Mega Man games. You would think that the late game bosses would try to at least kick their game into high gear, but they never do. Except for this fellow right here, he poses a big challenge. In return, this makes the huge bosses of the Wily Castle feel kinda disappointing, since most of them have just 1 or 2 attacks, and so the difficulty curve never really picks up. And don't get me wrong, I'm fine with easier games, but due to the previous quirks I mentioned, like the lack of balance between weapons, Mega Man 5 can feel a bit stale at times. And that is very unfortunate, because level design is not bad at all, and there are truly unique set pieces that will make the game stand out compared to the others. But as a counterbalance, due to how most of what makes Mega Man unique is more absent than usual, it also might come off as uninteresting to some. On the contrary, the 5th game of the original Exology can be a nice starting point for new players, due to its lenient difficulty. But if you're playing on release order, or if you have some previous experience with the franchise, Mega Man 5 can fail to catch your interest, and so, for me, it lands on 11th place on the list. Every franchise has a beginning, and in the case of Mega Man, the very first game with its name on the box was published in December of 1987, and then 2 years later in Europe. Looking back, it's surprising to see how many of the series' trademark mechanics were already present from the start. But with no intro cutscene or anything, the manual will be your best friend if you want some storytelling. But that is only if you're Japanese, because the overseas manual just made up some nonsense. About the game itself, if you're accustomed to later entries of the franchise, it might be shocking to see only 6 main stages instead of the usual 8. And adding up, these levels can feel simpler in nature when it comes to both looks and level design if you compare them to those found in future games. Considering there are only 10 stages if we count the endgame section, this results in a much shorter game, to the point where experienced players can get to the ending in about half an hour. Despite this simplicity though, Mega Man 1 can be absolutely ruthless at times, and your first blind run might take you days, even a week to complete. This is amplified by how there is no save feature at all. No passwords, no saving, you just gotta beat the whole game in one sitting, and that can be challenging unless you're very familiar with the game. And even considering how much of a novelty the non-linear gameplay was at the time, Mega Man 1 has a few issues when it comes to balancing the difficulty of each stage. It is done this way so players can organically create the perfect route by trying multiple stages until the perfect strategy is found. Although the first game takes it a little bit too far. For example, while Catman stage is very easy, trying to go for Iceman as your first stage, just booting up the game, is absolutely brutal, thanks to level gimmicks and the slippery ice that covers the entirety of the level. Oh, and now that I mention it, Mega Man's physics can feel a little slippery even without ice on the picture. According to Akira Kitamura, one of the leaders behind the project, the slight momentum that the Blue Bomber has in both this and the second game happens because at some point during development, Mega Man was supposed to control like Mario, for example. Even if it's almost gone, and platforming is usually not an issue, there will be cases where this inertia can lead you into an unfortunate trip into a bottomless pit. And that leads me to talk about polish, because one of Mega Man 1's biggest flaws is how some elements do not work properly, like how you can fall through the propellers in Iceman stage, the fact that Mega Man's vertical acceleration is not capped, and the biggest of all, the implementation of the magnet beam. This item can be found in Elecman stage, and you will need Super Arm beforehand if you want to get your hands on it. Although, even if it may seem like an optional item you can just have around if you want to, this is mandatory to beat the game, and that will not be communicated to the player until Wily Stage 1. And that results in a situation where, if you miss this item, as soon as you get here, then you will have to empty your life count and then exit the stage. And let me tell ya, that doesn't feel good at all. Though compared to the games I have discussed so far, Mega Man 1 has a pretty good endgame section, with 4 stages that combine previous challenges, adding up a massive boss to defeat at the end. The Yellow Devil made his debut here, and he went on to become one of the most iconic bosses in video game history. There is also one detail that I appreciate about this game, and it's how the boss rush is divided between 2 different levels. And to me, this makes the process of fighting all of the bosses again a bit more dynamic than just the room with 8 teleporters thing that Mega Man 2 turned into tradition. Oh, and on the topic of bosses, Mega Man 1 is a quite interesting game. Robot Masters can be either insanely difficult at a first glance, or an absolute joke if you either find about how their patterns work, or how to use their weakness. These are the most effective here too, which makes this entry a little bit extreme when it comes to its boss fights. It usually goes 2 ways, either you die in 3 hits, or they do, there is no in between. Although, thanks to how great most of the weapons are, and how nice the flow is when it comes to its gameplay, this very first Mega Man entry can be extremely fun once you understand a few of its quirks. And so, for me, it lands on the 10th spot on this list. Okay, if you're still watching, allow me to explain myself. Yes, Mega Man 2 takes 9th place on the list. However, I feel like both this and its predecessor could swap places and nothing will really change for me. Alright, let me dive in. After the failure of the original game to meet Capcom's expectations, Mega Man 2 had to be developed during the team's free time. And to say that this is a challenging development cycle will be an understatement. But the people led by Akira Kitamura and Keiji Inafune managed to pull it off. And so Mega Man 2 released in December of 1988 in Japan, while international versions arrived in summer of '89 and winter of 1990 respectively. The plot is a direct sequel to the end of the first game, with Dr. Wily creating 8 new robot masters of his own to conquer the world and have revenge on Mega Man. While its prequel set the basis of what the franchise will become, this entry would allow Capcom's Blue Robot to finally kickstart his way into pop culture. And this has led many to consider it the best game of the franchise. In my case, I feel like this game hides a few flaws that, although related to its complicated production, can cause quite some issues. To begin with, the main character's inertia remains as it was in Mega Man 1, except for the glitch regarding his falling speed, which got fixed. Although Mega Man 2 is not as brutal as its older sibling, some set pieces are still very extreme, considering that you can just run into them as soon as you press start on the title screen. And then, the lack of polish is very noticeable in this one too, especially in 2 pretty important aspects. The first are the bosses. And even if some of them may be pretty good, then you have opponents like Airman, who has an almost undodgeable pattern, or Quickman, whose AI doesn't work properly. And then the second are also tied to these fellas, and it's of course the weapons. Mega Man 2 has a major issue when it comes to balancing these tools. You have Metal Blade and Quick Boomerang on one hand, these two being very overpowered, with also nightly unlimited ammo, which can become infinite thanks to a programming error by the way. And while on the other hand you have stuff like Atomic Fire or Bubble Lead that are very hard to find uses for outside of boss fights. Oh, and about boss fights. While insanely memorable, the Wily Castle bosses are some of the worst out of the entire franchise. Yes, while Mecha Dragon is iconic, he is an absolute mess with erratic patterns and the inconsistent behavior of his AI. Same applies to the legendary Bobine Trap, a boss so convoluted that you might need to restart the whole level to get a second try. Both also suffer from sprite flickering and some other performance issues, due to the game loading too much stuff on screen. And then looking back, the Wily Castle stages themselves are not up to snuff either. Some are very short, while others have set pieces that require you to either wait for long periods of time or use items extensively, and that means that if you die and you run out of them, then you will have to farm. Not everything is negative though, as Mega Man 2 brought some nice improvements to the formula. Difficulty, even with its hiccups, is more balanced, and in case you're still having issues with what the game throws at you, international releases have an easier difficulty mode that makes enemies weaker. The game looks much better too, with some fancy graphics and a stellar soundtrack. The sequel also brought some new concepts to the franchise, like E-tanks and special items that are now obtained from specific bosses, thus guaranteeing that players will have them in their possession when the final levels ask for their usage. And even if I said that level design is messy when it comes to quality, especially as you approach the end of the adventure, the set pieces and the character designs found in this game are truly unforgettable, and with enough patience, Mega Man 2 can shine very bright. It's up to players to know if they can look past the flaws. That is why the 9th place of the list is taken by this game. Though, like I said, both this and Mega Man 1 could exchange places since they share similar issues. Okay, if you thought Mega Man 2 had a troubled development, well, Mega Man 3 calmly responds with "Hold my beer." Akira Kitamura, who worked as lead planner for the 2 previous entries, left the team while in development. Okay, so BurnCrow from the future here. After I wrote this down, Kitamura revealed through his Twitter page that he was not involved at all with Mega Man 3's development, just to let you know. And according to Keiji Inafune, the new person in charge didn't really understand Mega Man like he did. And this new planner left the team merely months before the game's deadline, leading Inafune to take that role and finally make it to a miraculous November 1990 release, with the US getting the game a month later, while it took 2 years for it to arrive in Europe. After learning about this, Mega Man 3's oddities become very interesting to analyze, since the game was clearly not completed on schedule. The lack of an intro cutscene being one of the very first tells that players will encounter, and then, well, just look at the stage select screen. Oh, and because there is no intro and barely any dialogue, it's back to the game manual to get any clues about that story. This third entry brought some of the series' most well-known characters into the picture, with Rush and Proto Man making their debut here. The Blue Bomber also got his slide, and it works wonders, for most of the time at least. It's somewhat saddening to see how good most of the Robot Master stages are, because once those are done, the quality of the level design begins to slowly fade away. Dog Robot stages are a nice idea on paper, extended versions of previous levels that house upgraded models of Mega Man 2's bosses. In practice, most of these are very messy, which leads me to think that they were barely tested at all. Though not all Robot Masters are built equal. Some of them can be hit or miss too, with a few of them having very unforgiving patterns, or just downright undodgeable attacks, if a few conditions are met. Then, as you approach the Wily Fortress, bosses become either harmless or buggy, and stages are cut short. So short that some of them don't even have checkpoints. While these flaws are very present, especially during the second half of the adventure, like I said, the main 8 stages have some great level design, accompanied by memorable set pieces, clean graphics, and a rocking soundtrack. The weapon set, on the other hand, is kind of a mixed bag. Some tools are very fun to use, like Shadow Blade, Search Snake, and the Gemini Laser, despite this one chugging on the NES's power, but others are either unreliable, like Topspin, or barely useful, like Spark Shock or Hard Knuckle. And thus, even if I love this game because it was my entry point to the series, Mega Man 3 lands in a very weird place now that I look at it with a more critical eye. It has many great qualities, and whenever I come back for a quick run, I never feel like I'm not having fun. But as I make progress through the game, I start to see the cracks. And so overall, this final game of the original trilogy is a pleasant experience. However, there will be some hurdles you need to get past to fully enjoy your time. That is why Mega Man 3 is my number 8 spot on this list. While Mega Man 2 and 3 are widely considered to be the best games of the franchise, here we have the polar opposite, being probably the most contentious entry of the entire series. Coinciding with the 10th anniversary of the Blue Robot, Mega Man 8 launched for both the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn in 1997, though the Japanese release on the PS1 arrived a little bit earlier in December of 1996. With this entry, Mega Man finally made his way into 32-bit consoles, which meant that Capcom had way more power to work with. While the consoles it was released on were able to display 3D graphics, Mega Man 8 stayed 2D. Still, graphics and visual effects are immensely detailed, and thanks to the jump from cartridges to CDs, high-quality sound and full motion video became a possibility. Thanks to the latter, Mega Man 8 can tell its story via animated cutscenes that narrate our Blue Armor Fellow's crusade against Dr. Wily and his new army of robots. This time, they are powered by a mysterious energy source he obtained after an extraterrestrial robot crashed on Earth. Story aside, when it comes to gameplay, the 8th entry on the series has some ups and downs compared to previous games. Mega Man does maintain both his charge shot and slide abilities, but gone are Rush, Beat, and the super adapters. E-tanks and their variations are missing too, being replaced by multiple items that can be used once per stage, like Rush Bike or Rush Medic. On the contrary, Mega Man gains access to the Mega Ball, a special weapon with various uses. When it comes to controls, there are some genuinely good changes, like the ability to map the Mega Buster and special weapons to different buttons, allowing them to be used in tandem, but also some detrimental modifications, like the slide having a delay at both its start and its end, Mega Man's lower running speed, and strangely, the implementation of very primitive swimming controls. While not everything was translated properly into this new era of video games, the staples of the franchise shine bright. Boss fights are great across the entire game, the new set of weapons is very fun to use, and the introduction of collectible bolts as the means to create upgrades give each playthrough a slight touch of customization. However, the main reason why Mega Man 8 is so divisive is none other than the levels themselves. Despite none of them having the lack of polish that past titles showed in a few occasions, every stage has a special gimmick. However, some of these are a bit too much of a departure from the usual formula, and that can lead to some players losing interest in the game. And once you get past those, the more traditional side of the game suffers from a lack of enemy variety. And that is a very unfortunate downside because it hurts replayability quite a lot. Despite all of that, there is one strong counterbalance to those issues, and it's how fun Mega Man 8 becomes once players understand how to use all of their arsenal to its maximum capabilities. Double jumping with the Mega Ball, using Thunderclaw to swing from pole to pole, or decimating rows of foes with a properly placed Ice Wave. Every weapon is more than just a boss weakness, and getting to discover all of their quirks is a fantastic experience. Granted, not all players will want to come back after the credits, and that's understandable, but thanks to its polished design, fantastic visuals and great weapons, I feel like Mega Man 8 is a cut above some of its predecessors, which is enough to get 7th place in my ranks. And then, just as we were done talking about Mega Man 8, here's a game that is undeniably tied to it. to the point where most people used to call it MegaMan 8.5 or the other MegaMan 8. Though I feel like that title fits the Saturn version a bit better. But that's a story for another day. MegaMan & Base came out for the Super Famicom in 1998, very late into the console's life. Even though it shares quite a few similarities with the previous chronological release for the franchise, this entry couldn't be more different. To begin with, stage progression is quite unique, with only 3 levels being available as soon as the museum is cleared. Then, as you take down Robot Masters, more paths will open, until they all converge at King's Castle. Oh yeah, this game has a new face on the villain's side. After kicking Dr. Wily out of his freshly built fortress, King begins his plans to create a world where robots can dominate over humans. It's up to MegaMan to stop the mechanical tyrant before it's too late. But this time, he's joined by none other than his nemesis, Base, who joins the fight to help Dr. Wily reclaim his territory. Compared to its siblings, MegaMan & Base was designed with a different target demographic. Yup, it was made for those players who, despite being familiar with the franchise, couldn't afford a new generation console to buy MegaMan 8. And so, Base is a much harder game. Though sometimes it goes a bit too overboard. Some of the games we've talked about so far have the common problem of dropping the difficulty as the end approaches. In this case, it's quite the opposite. As a quick example, King Stage 2 is commonly known as one of the toughest levels of the entire series, thanks to the presence of multiple boss fights, tricky platforming challenges, and the looming threat of a game over that will send you back to square one. And with healing items being very scarce, it's clear why players find this game to be absolutely brutal. Although, that doesn't mean it's a bad game, at least in my opinion. Just like I said on my full-blown video about this specific piece of Mega Man history, the controls are spot on, and Robot Master fights are both complex and engaging. Though I must say, there are 2 pesky fellows who have become the nightmare of those who dare to try and beat this game. While Burner Man is not a nice example of good game design, Dynamo Man offers a very unique encounter thanks to his ability to heal up mid-fight. And then, even if it may seem odd at first, the way stage progression is laid out makes weapons stand out even more. And that happens because you will not reach certain stages on your first go, and so a few of those late game stages are designed with that idea in mind. Oh, also, this game's set of weapons is amazing outside of that, and I must appreciate how some of them work differently depending on the character that you chose at the start. And to be honest, having 2 characters is really cool, and since their pros and cons are extremely opposite, it's up for players to find out which of the 2 suits them better. It's not a perfect game, and it's not perfectly consistent in design either. However, it lacks the problems some of the NES games had, and considering it brings some very interesting things to the table, Mega Man & Base lands right in the middle of the list. Though, make sure to play this once you're comfortable enough with the rest of the series, okay? Oh, and speaking of very tough games, Mega Man 9 is a very different take on what Mega Man & Base aimed to create. While being designed with veterans in mind, this 9th entry on the series went back to the most basic of basics to create an experience akin to the roots of the franchise. That means no slide, no charge shot, just you and your trusty lemon shooter against the world. Released digitally in 2009 for the Wii, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Mega Man 9 was very well received by critics and fans. The plot takes a fun spin on the usual formula, with Dr. Light being sent to jail after being accused by Dr. Wily of perpetrating the latest Robot Master riot. That means that it's up to Mega Man, Roll and Auto to clear their creator's name and bring back peace to the world. Visually, Mega Man 9 looks and sounds akin to the very first NES duology, but without the limitations of the system where those games were conceived. Though in case you miss the lag and the sprite flickering, you can add those back to the game if you activate Legacy mode. So have fun, I guess. If you've been playing all of the games in release order, going back to this type of gameplay can feel weird at first. While 9 carries over some stuff from games that came after 1 and 2, like Rush, the currency system, and a shop, it also removed some very convenient changes to the controls, like quick swapping for example. While the lack of a slide and the charge shot can bother some players, all levels and enemies have been designed with the absence of those elements in mind. And in case you really want those moves back, they have been given to Proto Man, who used to be DLC back then, but he's now included on the Legacy Collection. One change that I noticed when playing this game is that Mega Man's movement speed seems a bit faster here compared to the entries on the NES, so maybe that was added to compensate for the lack of a slide. Once you get accustomed to that though, Mega Man 9 has some pretty great levels, well-designed boss fights, and a wily castle that brings some insane challenges to the picture. The special weapons are fantastic too, and by the time this game came out, it was easily the best set of tools in the Classic series, at least in my opinion. Though on the opposite side of things, and similarly to Mega Man and Base, this entry can go a bit too far at times when it comes to difficulty, due to the nature of its design. Yes, it's conceived to be a challenge for veterans, but compared to its predecessor, Mega Man 9 also delves into the world of gacha traps at times, so that's something you need to be wary of in repeated playthroughs, since I honestly doubt that new players will see this coming on their first go. And if they do, holy cow, they must have the reflexes of a cat! Another negative point to 9 is how, in retrospect, to pay homage to the origins of the series, levels are back to being very simple in nature. Like I said, not having the charge and the slide is not an issue when playing the game. However, by removing those, set pieces had to be a little simple this time, since the main character is not as agile as it used to be. This also carries over to the boss fights in some aspects. Don't get me wrong though, Mega Man 9 is great, and experienced players surely will love it. But by being a tad too regressive at times, and crossing the line of fair difficulty on very specific occasions, place number 5 is its placement on the list. And so, we arrive at what is, in my honest opinion, the best game of the NES Xology. Mega Man 4 hit store shelves in December of 1991, 1 month later in America and 2 years after in Europe. The plot has seen a very interesting change, with Mega Man being sent to stop Dr. Kozak, a Russian scientist who unleashes 8 robot masters of his own to cause havoc around the world. With the company of Rush and his new fellow Eddie, Mega Man embarks on a journey to stop the scientist and discover the truth behind his motives. Mega Man 4 saw the debut of the newly named Mega Buster. By holding down the B button, players can charge up a shot that deals more damage to enemies and bosses. To say that this brought a new layer of complexity to the already excellent formula of Classic Mega Man would be an understatement. Now players need to choose, especially on boss fights. Do they focus on shooting smaller shots and keep the DPS going, or do they attempt to prepare a bigger one and try to avoid taking damage during its charge time? While traversing stages, this makes for a great set of main mechanics since it rises up the skill ceiling even more. Oh, and about those levels, by the way, they are absolutely nice. Each of the 8 Robot Master stages is a blast to play, with each one of them having a special trait that distinguishes them from the others. From Toadman's rain and water currents to Brightman's light puzzles and Pharaohman's moving platforms. Also, even if Mega Man 6 was the first game to truly harness multiple routes, 4 has 2 secret items, the balloon and wire adapters, hidden throughout the game. And about those weapons, they are amazing too. Every single one of them has a purpose, and the level of freedom they offer is sublime. This dedication when it comes to level design surprisingly carries over to the 2 castles that Mega Man 4 has in store. Because, yeah, Dr. Wily is still the main villain. I did mention how Mega Man 5 and 6 also have 2 castles, but they somewhat failed to bring some interesting things to the table. Mega Man 4, being the first game that tried to do this, absolutely nailed it. Each one of these 8 levels is honestly brilliant, and they give us some very interesting set pieces like this Snowy Ascent to Cossack Citadel, which forces players to use their tools accordingly to make progress, or the very first Wily stage, that's entirely designed around met enemies. You gotta love how it also ends with a fight against a giant met. And now that I bring up those boss fights, the robot masters in this game are top notch. They all have very interesting patterns, and it's up for players to figure out how to properly counter each one of their moves. The polish of their AI is leagues above previous games, and you gotta love how there is an extra layer of complexity to these fights, like Brightman's apparently undodgeable flash attack, which is only triggered when his HP hits a certain value, or Skullman's reaction to Mega Man's moves. And this level of quality stays during endgame boss fights, like Square Machine or the Cockroach Twins. It goes to show that when the team behind these games wasn't in a rush, they could put out some insanely good stuff. Not everything is perfect though. While difficulty is balanced very well across the board, there will be moments where new players will be surprised by traps or enemy placements that I doubt anyone will see coming without prior knowledge. And even if the controls feel as good as always, the new Mega Buster is a bit clunky to use at times, since you can't buffer a charge. These issues are very minor though, and considering all I've said about it, I feel like Mega Man 4 is worthy of 4th place on this list. Oh boy, we finally got to the top 3 now, huh? Mega Man 10 arrived 1 year after its prequel, to the very same systems, and just like 9, it only hit digital stores. The story setup has Mega Man, Proto Man, and Bass attempting to help Dr. Wily to find a cure for Robo-Enza, a disease that makes robots fall ill and then go berserk. But without Cyber Mr. Proper to barge his way into the spotlight, it's clear that the villain is Dr. Wily as usual. To this day, this is the only mainline entry to have 3 different playable characters, even if Bass arrived as DLC. You know how I mentioned 9 being very strict on its level design philosophy? Well, Mega Man 10 takes that and throws it out the window, and the end result is pure insanity. Like, have you ever played a Mega Man game where you fight pitcher robots on a mechanical football court? That fresh sense of originality is backed up by some quality level design, and a set of robot masters that has brought back those complex, challenging boss fights that I enjoy so much. Some of these feel like a dance, just try fighting Chillman and you'll know what I'm talking about. While graphics and sound mimic the NES once more, they are far more elaborate than what 9 had to offer. One thing that really stands out to me is how all 3 characters don't feel out of place in this game, despite levels being the exact same for all of them. And that must have taken some dedication. Oh, and now that I mention it, this was the first Classic MegaMan game to incorporate multiple difficulty settings in all of its versions, which is great for newcomers and veterans alike. Still, normal mode is very fine-tuned and it makes for a fun, yet challenging experience. A challenge that feels fair thanks to the quality of the controls. While Mega Man 10 behaves exactly like its predecessor, quick switching is back, and for the first time, it allows players to select Rush and other items without having to open up the pause menu. Once you're done with the Robot Master stages, the Wily Fortress awaits you as always. And let me tell ya, this is probably the strongest set of endgame stages in the entire series. It combines some previous challenges that mixes up enemies from previous levels, and in this case there are some very cool callbacks to past games and huge bosses to fight. And also, you gotta love the transition into the final stage. Even after the final boss is down, you have some extra stuff to do like challenge mode, endless attack, and my favorite of all, you can play 3 extra stages based on the Game Boy games. They even brought back the Mega Man killers, and trust me, that was unbelievable back when the game came out. And if you thought that was already pretty cool by its own, if you beat them, their weapons become available in the main adventure. You know a game is good when I struggle to find negatives about it. In Ten's case, it has to be the weapons. While not terrible, there are a few of them that I can't really use that much, and I guess that's because they are pretty situational. However, a hit or miss set of special weapons is just a small complaint on an otherwise amazing game, and to me, that makes it worthy of the 3rd spot on the list. Classic MegaMan, despite all odds, made his way to the SNES in 1995. According to Keiji Inafune, Mega Man 7 only had 3 months of development time. And even if it may seem insane, they managed to finish the game in time, and the results are... well, it's number 2 on my list. You can probably guess that I find it to be good. The 7th game of the series took advantage of the Super Nintendo's power to take graphics and sound to the next level, with huge, lively sprites accompanied by complex and detailed backgrounds. The sheer size of things in Mega Man 7 can take some time to adapt to, but once you get past that, oh boy, you're in for a treat. This game picks up just where 6 left off, with Wily breaking out of jail thanks to his backup plan. Witnessing the destruction around him, Mega Man rises up to the task of putting an end to the Doctor's plans once more. Though one big question arises when Bass and Treble show up, 2 mysterious robots who claim to also be fighting against Wily. While Robot Master levels are split into 2 sets of 4, the raw quality of these stages make up for it. Not only do they hit the right amount of challenge, but they are longer than usual, and that leaves room for many different gimmicks and elements that make the game more interesting. Even better, 7 took its prequel's idea of adding multiple paths and cranked it up to 11. Almost every stage has different routes that can open up by exploring or using your special weapons to interact with the environment. This sense of discovery is amplified by how much Mega Man 7 rewards you for taking your time to check every nook and cranny. You'll find stuff like the Rush letters that, when combined, will unlock the Super Adapter. You can fight Proto Man and receive his shield in return, and even obtain items like Rush Jet or the Energy Balancer, or even a special ball that lowers the item prices on the shop. Weapons are not only great for interacting with the environment, but most of them are quite useful in combat too. On the other hand, the Mega Buster now requires more time to charge up, and it only deals 2 points of damage instead of the usual 3. Because of this, Mega Man might seem a tad weak at first. But this plays into one of my favorite aspects of this game, the boss fights. Holy cow, the fights in Mega Man 7 are outstanding. Every single Robot Master has a quirky yet well thought out pattern, and even if they all may seem impossible at first, just take your time and analyze them, because once you do so, you'll notice how fun these encounters are. They really want you to use your tools to the max, slide just at the right time, and strike them back as soon as they drop their guard. The only stinker is probably Slash Man. He can be pretty unfair. This quality in design peaks at Wily Castle, where difficulty will start rising progressively. The final fight against Wily is infamous for being brutal, but I find it to be so tightly designed, it's hard not to enjoy it. Thus, even if it may take you a little bit of time to adapt to it, Mega Man 7 is easily one of the most underrated games of the series. Something that's insane for a product that had to be built from the ground up in around 90 days. Taking all of that into consideration, Mega Man 7 lands in spot number 2. And now we are off to the final one, ladies and gents. By process of elimination, you might have seen this game coming, but yep, Mega Man 11 takes number 1 spot here. Released in 2018 for the PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch and PC, the very last game of the whole franchise so far goes back to tell us about the reason why Dr. Light and Dr. Wily's friendship shattered into pieces. And that is the double gear system, which has become the main pillar of the Evil Doctor's latest scheme. With beautiful 2.5D graphics and a head-bopping soundtrack, the 11th entry of the series jumps straight into the usual Robot Masters. Although for the first time since Mega Man 4, our protagonist has a new tool to work with. The slide and charge shot are back, but double gear is the name of the game. By using the triggers, players can activate two different functions. One slows down time, and the other increases the strength of the Mega Buster. And when Mega Man's HP drops to low digits, players can also activate both of them at the same time as a desperation move. Using these tools comes at a cost, and that is the strain that it causes to the blue robot systems. If this meter maxes out, double gear will cause Mega Man to overheat, and it will become unavailable for a long period of time. Needless to say, using this new tool to your advantage makes for a pretty darn good time. And even if it may seem like a difficult thing to learn, the game gives you a quick test room to practice at your own leisure. If you want the challenge though, the entirety of Mega Man 11 is beatable without ever activating the double gear system, which speaks volumes about the quality of the game's design. While animations look a bit clunky at first, the controls feel spot on. For the first time, you can map the slide to a button, and while quick swapping is back, 11 brings what I like to call the ring menu to the picture. By tilting the right analog stick, you can quickly change to any weapon in a split second. And oh my goodness, this feels awesome. This game really makes it fun to play around with your tools, since you get a brief test room to come to grips with them, and being able to swap on the fly so fast is just amazing. No joke, I tried to speedrun this game due to how much fun I was having when going bonkers with my arsenal. It also helps that these weapons are really darn good across the board, and thanks to being able to use power gear to buff them up, it is easily the best set of weapons in the entire series. But then you might ask, what about those levels, right? Well, Mega Man 11 has the longest Robot Master stages we've seen so far. That length allowed the devs to create a very natural difficulty curve for every single level. While checkpoints can feel a bit brutal thanks to this choice, I enjoy longer stages since more set pieces get to be used, making for a more complete experience. They went all out on making each level feel very different compared to the rest, with easily recognizable gimmicks and visual designs. I gotta say, the backgrounds look beautiful here. These places feel alive, like how you enter Blockman's level accompanied by the blue, sunny skies, yet when you get to the boss door, it's nighttime. Speaking of, Robot Masters are another of 11's strongest suits. Since they get to use either speed or power gear, the complexity of each boss fight has a new layer to watch out for. The result is a set of encounters that are masterfully designed to be challenging yet very fair. No stinkers this time at all. Even mini-bosses have been given a surprising amount of care in 11. The game culminates on the Gear Fortress, which has some of the most intense levels I've seen on a Mega Man game. Though on the contrary, here's where the biggest flaw of Mega Man 11 shows up. Gear Fortress 3 and 4 feel unfinished. The first has a few enemies and then just cuts to the boss rush with nothing else at the end, and the latter is just a straight path to Wily. To me, it feels like they ran out of time or budget and these two had to be stripped down. While surprisingly underwhelming, the rest of the game is so good that compared to what happened to Mega Man 5 and 6, it's barely a problem. And those two first levels on the Wily Castle not only are insanely good, but they hide two very cool encounters with bosses. One is Speed Gear powered Yellow Devil, and the other, Moburn, is one really tough boss that really checks if you've learned to use your new equipment. Still, even though the challenge that makes Mega Man stand out from other platformers is present here, 11 is the best game for newcomers, thanks to how generous the item shop is and the existence of more advanced difficulty options. These are named in the most appropriate way possible too. You gotta love how much care they put into this, since 11 was essentially aimed to be a reboot for the series. Once the credits are over, you have quite a bunch of extra stuff to do, like challenges or Dr. Light's trial, the most brutal stage in the entire game. 11 might lack the presence of fan-favorite characters, and the endgame is cut a bit too short, but the quality of everything else is so high it makes up for its mistakes. And so, after giving it quite some time to think about it, the list is finalized with Mega Man 11 taking the crown as the best game in the Classic series, at least for me. And with that, ladies and gents, the end of the video is quickly approaching, so let me wrap this up real quick. No matter what I think of each entry, one thing is undeniable. The Mega Man series is filled with charm, and even its lesser titles are good enough to be considered excellent video games by themselves. That is why no matter where you look, you'll see very varied opinions when people attempt to rank these games from best to worst. So please let me know about your lists in the comments. I would love to just talk and discuss the topic with you all. Also, even if I have been harsh to the lower entries on the list, I don't hate any of these games, so don't take it too personal, okay? Well then, I think it's finally time to wave goodbye for now. If you enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate if you interact with the video in any way. You know the drill, the funny thumbs up hand, the red thing that says subscribe, yada yada. Jokes aside, if you like this, please consider subscribing. There will be more videos coming up soon, so yeah, I would appreciate that very much. Thank you all for watching, take care of yourselves, and I wish you a very nice day. Crow out.